to break down the DFS slate for here on awesemo.com. Pete, man, how you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm excited for another fantastic card that Dana White has created for us. Some exciting matchups to talk about, and let's win some money.
Yeah, of course. I think one thing we got to talk about before we get going here is the fact of on Saturday night, it'll be the smaller cage inside the UFC Apex, be the 25-footer as opposed to the 30-foot cage. And the smaller cage definitely benefits a certain type of fighter, Pete.
Yeah, I know all about that. And I don't like fighting in small cages because I'm a striker. And the smaller the cage, the more it favors grapplers. So it's a very difficult situation that a lot of these fighters now have to adjust to. But, it's making me lean slightly towards some grapplers on the card.
And, obviously, we've got two quote unquote grapplers in the main event here. Tyron Woodley taking on Gilbert Burns. This was Gilbert Burns did a great job of talking himself into this fight after he got that big win against Damian Maia. And, when it was uncertain what was going to happen with that London event back in March, Gilbert Burns was trying to put himself into that fight. And he ultimately got that fight. And one of the things that's kind of crazy is last time we saw Tyron Woodley is when he lost the UFC welterweight title against Kamaru Usman back in March of 2019. Since then, Gilbert Burns has won 4 fights in a row. He is the underdog in this one. Gilbert Burns on DraftKings, he is at 7,400, 8,800 for Tyron Woodley. Over on FanDuel, pricing a little different in terms than DraftKings, as it's $22 for Woodley and $18 for Gilbert Burns. I think if you're going to be a Woodley backer in this one, you got to be counting on a stop first, second, maybe even third round, because one of the things, and we've seen this with multiple fights with Tyron Woodley, is the lack of volume from him.
Yeah, Woodley is not the most active fighter. When he's in there, he constantly puts his back against the cage, which is, very disturbing, especially when you're facing a lot of guys that can press you there, bigger opponents. You think of his fight against Darren Till, Kamaru Usman, going up against Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns is going to look to take him to the mat. Obviously, that's where he holds the jiu-jitsu advantage over Tyron Woodley. And after watching Woodley's previous performance against Usman, he's probably going to think that he can go in there and just out wrestle Woodley, no problem at all, put him on his back and make it miserable for him. But I don't know, man. I feel like you guys must have forgot how good Tyron Woodley is. I mean, he's at the top of the division and he's pretty elite. His resume speaks for itself, whereas Gilbert Burns' best win is Damian Maia, who is in his 40s and not really at the best, part of his career. So for me, it's an interesting matchup. And I'm definitely favoring Woodley in here to get a stoppage. I just don't know if it's going to be early. You would hope so. I mean, he's been working out at AKA Thailand, before the quarantine and doing a lot of stuff with Mike Swick. But, as far as the matchup against Burns, he should really have no problem with Burns. Burns obviously has great kickboxing thanks to Henry Hoof and, world-class BJJ. But I think that we've seen Burns lose to lower competition and also get cracked and hurt and dropped numerous times. And I think Woodley just needs a few moments to land that right hand. And, I think he can get an easy W here.
Of course, if you do have any questions on the fights, leave them right in the chat on YouTube. We will get to those questions as we go through the fights. Of course, this is the first time watching myself and P. We go from the main event all the way to the very first fight of the night. Also, coming up on Saturday, 1 hour before the fights, we'll have a live before lock, as we'll do a Q&A session on the fights. We talked about Woodley. Let's talk about Gilbert Burns and his path to victory. Everyone knows we saw, obviously, the knockout that he had against Damian Maia, but when you talk Gilbert Burns, you think of submissions and you think of his jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Gilbert Burns should look to take, Woodley down to avoid the big power that he has. But I really feel like this is going to show how strong Tyron Woodley is and that he can stop some takedowns. I mean, yes, Kamaru Usman took Woodley down, but before that, he was stuffing everybody's, takedown attempts. Damian Maia tried to take him down, I think it was like 12 times or something ridiculous, and he stuffed every single one of them. I think Burns doesn't represent the grinder wrestler type of approach that Kamaru Usman did. And Burns is he's a BJJ guy, and no offense to BJJ guys, but they're not on the same level when it comes to takedowns that some high caliber wrestlers have. Kamaru Usman was a D2 national champ. So I think Woodley's going to be too strong to get taken down. It's just his volume. I don't know if he's going to go in there and get necessarily a first or second round stoppage. He should go in there and get a win, a decisive win. So I'll have plenty of Tyron Woodley. But, oddly enough, I'll have some lineups without the main event. And that's usually something that I avoid.
One of the questions that we got from Dan in the chat goes, can you stack Woodley and Burns on DraftKings? My simple answer is no. This to me is not a stackable fight.
I'd have to agree. I wouldn't do it. I think it doesn't, I'm just favoring Woodley so much in the matchup that it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there's other fights you can look at and say, hey, that's a stackable fight. But to me, this main event's not a stackable fight. I definitely will have lineups with Tyron Woodley. I'll probably have at least one lineup with Gilbert Burns. I mean, but to me, if you're a one lineup player, I would recommend going Woodley more than I would Burns.
Yeah, the value's there for Gilbert Burns at 7,400 if you really think that he's going to go get it done. I just think it's a very difficult matchup. I think Burns, steamrolls through a lot of guys in the division, but I think that Woodley is a bad matchup for him. And I just hope that Woodley can get back to his old roots of that, somewhat aggressive striking, big power shots, can take you down if he wants, but he doesn't just let Gilbert Burns dictate the pace and the position of the fight.
Co-main event's going to be a heavyweight matchup. Blagoy Ivanov taking on Augusto Sakai. Blagoy, 8,000 on DraftKings, 8,200 for Augusto. On FanDuel, $16 for Blagoy, $17 for Augusto Sakai. One of the things about Blagoy, he's had some big opportunities in the UFC, but it's been, going the distance. We haven't seen those stoppages. He's a plotting type fighter would be the best way to put it. In terms of this, I expect Augusto Sakai probably tries to keep the fight on the feet. He's got to stay away from those looping punches that we'll see from Blagoy Ivanov. Blagoy is a guy that he's one of these fighters I'm kind of targeting. Maybe he's more of a cash game than a GPP just based on, the odds of a finish are, I would say under 50%, even though it is a heavyweight matchup. But I think this is one of those fights you have to look at.
Yeah, I can't blame you. It's not the most exciting matchup in my opinion. I think that Augusto Sakai is going to want to keep it on the feet. He probably looks crisper with his technique than Ivanov does, but I'm favoring Blagoy a little bit, and at the 8,000 price range, I don't hate it. Now, I know that he's been training with some high quality teammates that you're going to mention, and I think, despite the fact that he goes the distance a lot, I think he can go in there and just maybe get back to his combat sambo roots, where a lot of people don't realize that he has a win over Fedor Emelianenko. Granted, he doesn't use his grappling as much as he should, but it's always in that back pocket if he starts to get lit up on the feet or if he just wants to really dominate the fight. So I think Blagoy's got to do something in this fight to kind of stay relevant in the division. I'm not going to go crazy with Blagoy in my lineups, but I do like him a little bit. I probably will have little Sakai.
Yeah, when you mentioned the name Blagoy Ivanov, the one thing I think of is when he was fighting Alexander Volkov at Bellator 120. And about a month before the event, I'm up at the Bellator show in New Jersey, in Atlantic City, and we're doing a pre-package for the fight. And, they're asking me questions about both guys. And my wife was with me. We walk out of the room after we do it. I said, I already know what this piece is going to be about. She goes, what do you mean? It's going to be all about him getting stabbed in a Bulgarian nightclub. And that's what the entire it was funny because Bellator 120, the anniversary just came up here last week, and it came right across my timeline. It's immediately the first thing I thought of. But it's a fight that in something you alluded to is that Bugoy mentioned today how he had been working with Francis Ngannou. And when you're sparring Francis Ngannou, you're seeing one of the heaviest punchers in the UFC. Of course, I am Jason Floyd. That is Pete Rogers Jr., the fighter here, breaking down UFC on ESPN number 9. And then, of course, there's always matchups that you feel like you walk into a UFC card and say, you got to roster this fight. And that may be this fight between Billy Quarantillo and Spike Carlisle. Billy, 8,600. Spike, 7,600 on DraftKings. On DK, 18 for Billy Q and 14 for Spike. I live in Tampa, and that's where Billy is from. Billy trains here. So I'm sure that his coaches there at Gracie South Tampa have called up to Alon Cruz and his coaches and said, hey, what was your game plan? Obviously, it did not go well for Alon Cruz here. I feel like if you want to be a Spike backer, you're thinking he's going to get that first round finish. I think if this gets that past the first 5 minutes, this is Billy's fight. But Billy on the other side, I think he's just the more well-rounded fighter.
Yeah, it's definitely a fight that when I was looking over the card, I circled almost immediately. And that's how I like to develop my lineups, is looking at fights I want to target. It's like hot spots where I know that somebody's going to get finished in a bout, and this is definitely one of them. I think you have to have somebody in this fight. If you avoid this fight and you cash, I'll be pretty surprised. It's kind of almost how that Darren Elkins Nate Landwehr fight was last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. We said you needed to have that, and Landwehr ended up. It was a close fight. Even Elkins in a loss had a great score. So I think this is another one. It's a high-paced fight. Lighter guys. So anytime, you have lighter guys, you could expect more action, probably more, opportunities for advances, transitions, everything. Quarantillo, we have seen him on the Contender Series and on the Ultimate Fighter in some bad positions. He does get put on his back despite being a good wrestler. He sometimes goes for pretty desperate shots and gets reversed, ends up on his back and takes a ton of damage, and doesn't have the best stand-up ability, like getting back up to his feet. Spike Carlisle has some good judo. He's a black belt in judo, brown belt in jiu-jitsu. Just we don't know too much about him, and you can't really, look at that one fight against Alon Cruz. It only lasted 1 minute and 25 seconds. So I do think this is a very, very close matchup, and they're probably going to negate each other in some areas. Now, if I had to kind of put like what I think is going to happen, Carlisle should have the edge for an earlier finish. Quarantillo definitely seems to have the better gas tank. And if it makes it out of the first round, I could see him just outworking Spike Carlisle, because Spike Carlisle is a big guy and like pretty solid guy for his stature. And I feel like going back on his other fights outside the UFC, I have seen him like struggle with his cardio. So if I'm Quarantillo, and I already have some UFC experience, some Ultimate Fighter. I mean, I'm used to the cage. I'm used to people not being there. I would try to drag Spike Carlisle into deep water and get a late finish. However, I am actually thinking that Spike Carlisle can really put Billy Quarantillo in some bad spots and rack up some points. I need somebody under 8,000 to outperform their salary. And I think that Carlisle will be it. I'm going to have about 60% Carlisle, 40% Quarantillo.
And be sure to hit that like button here on YouTube. And, of course, if you do have any questions, hit us up right there in the chat. We will get to your questions as we go on. But I do want to mention that sign up for the Awesemo Plus MMA weekly package for $8.95, where you'll get access to all of Awesemo's coveted tools. Go to awesemo.com/join and take advantage of this offer. And be sure to follow Awesemo on Twitter at Awesemo_com. We always talk about every week that Fantasy Cruncher tool is a great thing where, especially if there's one fighter you really like, or maybe there's a fighter or fighters that you don't want to have in your lineup, using that Fantasy Cruncher part of the premium package there is definitely something that you do want to take advantage of. Now, one of the most expensive fighters on this card is Roosevelt Roberts. He's at 9,200, taking on Brock Brock Weaver at 7,000, $21 for Roosevelt on FanDuel, $11 for Brock Weaver. This is one of these fights where, to me, it's either you take the favorite or you pass. I just don't, I know that people are going to look at, obviously Brock is a name people saw in the Contender Series. But when you look at his UFC debut, it's a quote unquote DQ win. But I think he knows that, how that fight was going for him. So to me, it's take Roosevelt Roberts, but at 9,200, he's got to get the finish.
Yeah, that's the thing about Roosevelt Roberts at 9,200 is, he is definitely the A side of the fight. He should go in there and get the W against Brock Weaver. But I think it's going to be some tough sledding based on Brock Weaver's toughness. Brock Weaver is very, very tough, able to endure a lot of damage. Brock does get taken down quite a bit in his fights, but he does stand back up. So I'm not saying that Roberts is going to go in there and get a quick finish like he normally does with quick guillotine chokes, but his wrestling ability and the way that Weaver struggles to prevent takedowns could lead to a high score for Roosevelt Roberts at 9,200. Like I said, he's definitely the A side in the fight, but in his past few fights, okay, he hasn't impressed me that much. Losing to Vince Pichel, and just kind of getting outworked, and almost seems like he has a good poker face, but almost like he has some cardio issues. And I feel like Brock Weaver's going to be there from bell to bell. I don't think he's too skilled. I don't think he's on a skill level that Roosevelt Roberts is. But that doesn't mean that he's going to just disappear and go away. I think that, normally Roberts is the longer, bigger guy in the fights. And in this matchup against Brock Weaver, Brock's pretty big. And although that Roberts is 6'2" and Weaver's 6 foot, Weaver's a pretty, big guy. So I think that normal edge Roberts has is slightly negated. I do expect Roberts to go on there and get a win and looking pretty good. All Weaver has is really just volume, and I don't really see him, paying off or being a necessity for your roster.
Travis in the chat going, Weaver gonna lay the smack down. Look, it's you go back to that last performance, and I think that's the thing that we ultimately kind of remember a lot about him. So to me, I think it's take Roberts. I do want to mention a question we got in on the previous fight from Hunter. He says, Pete, you think Carlisle could not have a good score and defeat late knockout?
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar to last week's fight that we just spoke of, the Nate Landwehr and Darren Elkins fight. I think that either one of them's going to have, if it goes beyond round one, obviously, that either one of them is going to, have a decent score, because I think it's just going to be an action-packed fight. But I don't like stacking fights. That's just me. I don't like stacking fights. I wouldn't recommend it. I am, like I said, leaning slightly to Spike Carlisle at about 60%, 40% for Billy Quarantillo.
Another question that we got in here that I wanted to mention it was from Nason. Says, you guys think the smaller octagon plays a big role in these fights? We talked about that briefly at the beginning of the show. Plays a role for the grapplers.
Yeah, 100%. So in some of my fights, like when I fought for Bellator, the cage is huge. I feel like I could dance around and strike all day long and not have to worry about getting engaged in a grappling contest. When I fought on smaller promotions and who I currently fight for CES, it's more of a tight cage where the action is forced. So I think this is a strategic move from Dana and the matchmakers to really put on more exciting fights, since the whole world is tuning in. They want action from bell to bell. And I also think that, it's crazy because the big cage looks good on TV. So the obvious answer of why they're doing this is they just want more action.
Yeah, I think that's the pretty clear way to look at it. The opening fight on the main card, which, by the way, the main card starts 9 p.m. Eastern time, 6 p.m. Pacific time. Prelim starts 6 p.m. Eastern time, 3 p.m. Pacific time. So know when to get those lineups in. Mackenzie Dern versus Hannah Cipher. Mackenzie Dern, the biggest favorite on this card. Her DK price is $9,300, $6,900 for Ciphers, and then $19 for Dern on FanDuel. And for Ciphers, it is $10. To me, it's kind of like the last fight. It's you take that fight or you move on. You take
I don't know what just happened
Mackenzie
right there.
Dern or you just move on.
Yeah, I love Mackenzie Dern here. I think that she's my favorite play on the entire slate. I love her here at 9,300. I know that she really hasn't lived up to her potential, her grappling potential so much. I just think that she can go in there and just implement her game plan. She throws bombs. And honestly, in my opinion, Hannah Cyphers is pretty lucky to still be in the UFC. She does have some sneaky wins, but I think she's like the low tier fighter of the female 115-pound division. Mackenzie Dern is going to be way too big, way too strong, have, such a grappling advantage. And after watching tape on Hannah Cyphers, she doesn't really have good takedown defense. So when I just see her getting bulldozed by some fighters and put on her back and getting finished by Angela Hill, and when it hits the mat, just getting controlled by Angela Hill, I can only imagine what Mackenzie Dern's going to do. Now the thing is, with that price tag at 9,300, you need a quick finish or an absolute dominant performance with a finish to pay off, and I'm willing to risk it. And 9,300 Mackenzie Dern is going to be a staple in probably all my lineups or most of them.
And when you look at the betting odds, it definitely the feeling is that she's going to win by submission and sometime pretty early on in the fight. So if you want to make Mackenzie Dern kind of the staple of your lineup, I don't think that is a bad decision at all. Travis asking about if we discuss Roybal or Elliott. We will be getting down to that fight as we kind of work our way down. So that one is coming up. This is an interesting question coming from Game Theory. Is UFC better on DraftKings or FanDuel?
I personally think DraftKings. I just like DraftKings setup. Maybe it's because I'm used to it, and I've just been playing DraftKings so much. But I don't know. I think it's more well-rounded. It's hard to say that though, because DraftKings definitely favors grapplers and FanDuel favors strikers. So I don't know. I just like the DraftKings setup.
On FanDuel, it's all about that MVP spot. You have to find the right, you find someone who can potentially end the fight in the first round, or maybe if you have someone like a Kamar Usman who just, racks on the points as the fight goes on. Hunter asking a question about Mackenzie Dern says, did Dern ever wrestle? How is takedown coming exactly?
I'm sure she has some wrestling experience. I mean, she has world championship jiu-jitsu experience. So she's definitely trained in wrestling, a lot. But I don't know if she's actually competed in wrestling, but her jiu-jitsu, it all starts on the feet in jiu-jitsu as well, even whether you're doing gi or no gi. And she excels in that. She works a lot of, leg laces and trips and, foot sweeps and all that. So I think her best way to take down Hannah Cyphers is simply press her against the cage and just nice and easy drag her down by, a leg lace, take her right to the mat, maybe an outside reap. So just taking her feet and just using her feet to basically, block one of her legs and take her to the mat pretty easily.
The next fight is one of two fights I have on my notes as fights that I am passing on. There's scratch out fights for me. Katlyn Chookagian, 7,700 on DK, $13 on FanDuel, taking on Antonina Shevchenko. She's 8,500 on DK, 15 on FanDuel. Of course, the sister of Valentina Shevchenko. Personally, I think the odds makers are wrong on this one. I believe that Katlyn should be the favorite in this fight. However, she's not a DFS play. I mean, she just doesn't score enough. Now, maybe on a cash games where maybe you think she can score 70 points and you're looking to spend a little bit lower. To me, from a GPP play, it would be Shevchenko or move on. Just because, Katlyn's a fighter that has shown not to, she's going to walk away with decision victory. And I looked at it the other day. The over 2.5 rounds in this fight, Pete, was minus 565.
Yeah, and that's not a crazy line because this is the most odd matchup ever because, Shevchenko's sister, Valentina, is just coming off a victory against Chookagian, and now the other sister is fighting her. So it's very weird because I don't know if the win over Chukagian is going to really look as impressive if, Antonina goes out there and gets a win over Chukagian. It's just a super weird fight. They're both, not the most active fighters. They don't throw high volume. Chukagian moves around a lot, very awkward style, throws a lot of kicks, a lot of punches, misses a ton. Shevchenko is, a plotting Muay Thai artist where she just goes in there and looks to get close within range and then throws her combinations. Let me just say that Chukagian has no ground game, and I would be absolutely surprised if she did anything on the ground. So if I'm Shevchenko and you just want to take Chukagian down to the mat, every opponent has done it and had success. I'm not going to have much of this fight at all, but Chukagian can dance on the outside and just pick apart some opponents and frustrate a lot of people. So at 7,700, she's not a terrible value play, but I'll have a few lineups with her.
Then we got Daniel Rodriguez taking on Gabriel Green. Of course, this initially was supposed to be Daniel Rodriguez versus Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland pulled out of the fight. What was it? Tuesday, I want to say it was. I think it was Tuesday because I remember I was in the office on Tuesday. And so Daniel Rodriguez price point has not changed, and that is something to pay attention to here. On DraftKings, $7,300, $13 on FanDuel. Gabriel Green, $6,800 and $12 on FanDuel. One of the comments in the chat says Rodriguez is cheap on DraftKings, but he might not score enough points to be on the first place lineup. I personally believe Daniel Rodriguez will be the most owned fighter in the $15 GPP. At 7,300. This is a guy that's right now is a 3.5 to 1 betting favorite. Could be, maybe by the time Fight Night gets here, he'll be a 4 to 1 favorite. To me, he's going to be in a bunch of my lineups.
Yeah, I can't blame you there. And I think that from a betting perspective, it's not the best odds at minus 350, but I think that he's one of the closest fighters to an easy win. I'm not going to say lock, but an easy win. He should go out there and get rid of Green, or at least just make it miserable for him in the cage, whether it's standing up, grappling, whatever he wants, I think he can do to Green. Now, this is very similar to the Giga Chikadze situation that we dealt with 2 weeks ago, where, somebody dropped out and, the prices never changed for the fighter that was still in the fight. So Rodriguez here at 7,300 is my value play, and a lot of people are going to have him. I'm going to have him in a lot of lineups. Will I avoid him in some in case he doesn't get the best score and just gets a safe 60, 70-point victory? Of course I will. But let me tell you that Rodriguez is probably going to be in about 70% of my lineups because I think that he can submit him, TKO him, whatever he wants to do to the tough Green. Green is tough. I think that he can hurt him and just make it miserable for him.
Lamar asking, does it make sense to stack that fight with Green in cash because you gain an extra $450 in salary over other cash lineup constructions?
No, do not do that.
Quick and to the point.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a thought process to not play this fight at all. I get that, but if you're talking about these big GPPs where if Daniel Rodriguez goes out there and gets a first round finish, he will be in the optimal lineup. I mean, if you are trying to not put him in your lineup, that entire fight, you're just sitting there, you're hoping for a 15-minute decision.
Yeah, exactly. And, if putting Rodriguez in my lineup ruins my lineup or doesn't get me to the optimal, I'm okay with it because he's in such a safe spot. Like, this is literally a safe matchup for him. He can expose Green on the mat. Green's tough on the mat and does have some submission wins. But let me tell you that he's usually on his back getting beat up. Standing up, he just throws bombs. So if you want a long shot play, yeah, throw 6,800 Green in there because, the leverage of the ownership is going to be there for him. But let me tell you, Rodriguez should go in there and have no problem. He just finished Tim Means. So, Rodriguez is my value play of the week.
Yeah, it's a gift for us on DraftKings and FanDuel this week to get this pricing the way it is. Hunter says Green is going to bring it and force Daniel's hand. Well, we'll see this position, but this is I think that it's for me, Daniel Rodriguez will be a huge staple in all of my lineups on Saturday night. Then there's another fight that I feel like you probably have to roster as well, and that's Jamal Hill, 8,400 on DK, $17 on FanDuel, taking on Gleison Abreu, 7,800 and $15 on FanDuel. Of course, we remember, Hill's last fight where he got taken down a lot. One of the things I've learned over the last 48 hours or so is he's really been working on his wrestling leading up to this one, working with some guys up there in Michigan, working on his wrestling. Look, he's got to keep the fight on the feet. If Jamal Hill is going to win this fight, it's because he kept the fight on the feet, stopped the takedowns. But if you're Abreu in his corner, they saw that last fight. They saw what Stochik was able to do. They're going to sit there and say, Stochik's not a wrestler. Let's go in there and wrestle this guy.
Let me tell you, I absolutely hate Darko Stosic because I was backing him in the previous matchup when he was facing Jamal Hill because I thought he could totally expose Jamal Hill by taking him down. Now, let me tell you, he was just in there, getting beat up the whole time like an everlast punching bag, and then decided, had a great thought that he was going to start taking him down and wound up with 6 takedowns throughout the fight after getting destroyed. So I don't like this matchup for Jamal Hill, and I know that he's been working on his wrestling. But Abreu has a different type of grappling approach. He's not going in there like shooting like a D1 wrestler where it's all double legs and single legs. It's the jiu-jitsu type of takedowns, the inside trips, the outside reaps, where you press him, you get the body lock, and then you really, like I was saying for Mackenzie Dern, you use your legs to help you get the takedown. Jamal Hill should have a lot of hype around him because he looked great beating up Darko Stosic in his past fight. And standing up, he looks pretty good. I mean, he just has a lot of volume, got good power. He's a big dude. He's 6'4". He could be one of the next big things in the division. But I think he has somewhat of a learning curve, and he's going to have to deal with somebody who's going to take him down and want to take him to the mat over and over. Maybe you defend the first takedown, but what about the second, third, and fourth? Now, if Abreu is intelligent, and he is, coming from a good camp, he's going to look to take him to the mat and work towards a submission. We haven't seen, Jamal Hill really face much adversity. And this is another position where I will have some Hill because I think that the talent's there. I'll probably have about 40% Hill, but I'll have plenty of Abreu because I think that Abreu can expose him if he gets him to the mat and really put on a great performance for grappling. 7,800. I need somebody under 8,000 that can get me a win and kind of, impose their will in a very good spot. And I think it's through the grappling of Jamal Hill. So give me Abreu at 7,800 as another value play for me.
And I'm more on the Hill side in this one, but yeah, I'm definitely concerned that he just gets taken down, potentially gets taken down over and over again, and Abreu is able to rack up some points on the takedowns, particularly on DraftKings, because DraftKings is so grappling based. Be sure to hit that like button here on YouTube. If you do have any questions for us, leave them in the chat. We will get to them. And of course, also coming up on Saturday, we'll have Live Before Lock at 5 p.m. Eastern time, 1 hour leading up to UFC on ESPN number 9. Another fight that I feel like you got to look at is Tim Elliott and Brandon Roybal. Tim Elliott, 8,700 on TK, 18 on FanDuel, 7,500 for Roybal, and $14 on FanDuel. This was a fight that was initially Tim was offered Jordan Espinoza. Tim accepted the fight. Then he found out that Jordan actually turned the fight down. Jordan's now going to fight Mark De La Rosa coming up on a future card. So Brandon Roybal gets into the UFC on this opportunity. They're actually both managed by the same agency. That agency has six fighters on these cards that are fighting each other. So 3 fights are all represented by the same agency in this one. Tim Elliott, he has been a DK stud. Obviously he's had some moments that have not been good, particularly his last 2 fights. But because of his grappling and scrambles and constantly advancing feet, Tim Elliott's a guy you have to look out for. But early on, Brandon Roybal definitely is dangerous.
Yeah, let me say that I think that Brandon Roybal is going to be one of the most popular plays under 8,000, and for good reason, because Brandon Roybal has, of all the fights I've ever seen, some of the best jiu-jitsu attempts and submission attempts that I've ever seen, and that's I'm being serious. I don't know his accolades of like how much he's competed in grappling tournaments, but in every single MMA fight that I've watched, and I watched almost all of his fights, you know, even outside of this opportunity, he puts together like, you know, transitions from a triangle to armbar back to a triangle, and then, you know, omoplata. He has such a good guard. But when you are so talented in jiu-jitsu, sometimes you're on your back and you're losing an MMA fight because you're getting beat up, or the person on top is able to get out of these positions and then put you in bad spots. I think that it's somewhat of a reach to think that Roybal is going to come in the UFC and submit somebody who, you know, was a title challenger in Tim Elliott. Tim Elliott is super awkward. I think this is a very tough fight for Roybal because you can't really train for Tim Elliott. Tim Elliott's an animal. He's so awkward. His striking's weird. His scrambles are unorthodox. He's tough, and he has been submitted by some of the elite within the division. You know, the guillotine against Davison Figueiredo, and you know, I think that it's somewhat of a vulnerable spot because Roybal's so good on the mat. But I think that Elliott's toughness and experience can persevere here, and he can really put on a show. I mean, he landed 12 takedowns against Luis Smolka in his previous fights, you know, back in the day, but still he has that potential. 5 against Demetrius Johnson. So let me just say that Tim Elliott is one of my high 8,000 plays that I think a lot of people are overlooking and not giving enough credit to, and I'm fine with that. I'll gladly take Tim Elliott at 8,700.
You know, I had a chance to talk to Tim at the end of last week, and one of my takeaways from the conversation was the fact that Tim said, you know, he's like, "Hey, look, this kid's got a lot of quick wins," and which I took as, I want to take this kid to deep water. I want to see what he's got the second and third round. And but he said, he thought one advantage that Brand did have coming in for this being his UFC debut, he goes, it's not your typical UFC event. It's not like an event in Vegas with all the fans. There's no fans in attendance. He said, actually, I think that kind of works out in his favor, some of those nervousness. But, you know, Tim is a guy that I've had a chance to talk to over the years many times. And I always feel like when I talk to him, he always kind of gives you a little something. And the thing I took out of that interview was the fact that he basically said, "Hey, I want to take this kid to deep waters." Of course, you can, if you want to just go to my Twitter timeline at Jason_Floyd, you can see exactly that interview. Is up on my YouTube channel. Then we got a bantamweight matchup: Louis Smolka and Casey Kenny. Louis Smolka $7,100, $11 on FanDuel. Casey Kenny $9,100 on DK, $19 on FanDuel. Casey Kenny, when I spoke to him late last week. By the way, something to note: a majority of these fighters all got these fights last Wednesday. So it's basically 9 days notice of 10 days notice of taking this fight. When I talked to Casey Kennedy, because I think outside looking in, because of his wrestling abilities, I think the general thought was, well, Casey's going to use his wrestling here. I walked away from that conversation not so convinced that that's the game plan.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he's playing tricks with you, and maybe that is the game plan. He's going to go in there and just take Louis Smolka down because, you know, if you look at Louis Smolka's previous fights, you know, dating back even a while before he got cut from the UFC, he's been taken down quite an awful lot by a lot of people. And I think that Kenny can just super expose him by putting him on the mat and putting him on his back. But, you know, in this bout, I'm favoring Kenny. I just don't really like his salary at 9,100. He's the A side in the fight. I think that he can outclass him on the feet because Louis Smolka, he's pretty uncomfortable standing up, especially when he's getting hit. So I like Casey Kenny in the bout. I think that he can use his nice judo, his good submission defense to basically avoid Louis Smolka's attempts. And I know that people are going to point to the reach and the length that Louis Smolka has over Casey Kenny. That really only helps if Louis Smolka likes to stand up and use his jab and everything. Whereas I think Louis Smolka, he just likes to throw enough to get the clinch, get him against the cage, and work his jiu-jitsu because that's a safe approach for him. I don't think he really enjoys getting lit up or standing on the feet and trading. So give me Casey Kenny in a few lineups at 9,100. I can't fault you if you like Louis Smolka at 7,100 though, because of, you know, his previous fights. I mean, if he does get Casey Kenny against the cage, when you have longer arms, you're able to lock your hands a lot easier. So that's another thing you can think of as well. So I'm basically going about 70% Kenny, and I'll have probably 30% Smolka.
Yeah, it's I think with Casey Kenny, it's can he get the finish? When he's won his 2 UFC wins, he scored 83 points, 84, 83 points in that range. And that's a bounce back fight. Also, his coach has fought Luis Smolka in the past, so that is something to pay attention there too. Then the opening fight of the night, Chris Gutierrez, Vince Morales. Gutierrez 8,300, Morales 7,900 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, $17 for Gutierrez, $16 for Morales. This is a fight that is a scratch out fight for me, just because I just don't think I think it's going 15 minutes. I don't think the score is going to be high. I think that the winner's going to probably be in that 65 to 70 range. I don't see the finish coming in this one. This is Chris's first fight since knee surgery, so it'll be interesting to see if Vince goes after him. I talked to both these guys, and Vince knows that the book is out there. He doesn't check leg kicks, and and he firmly expects to see some leg kicks.
Yeah, let me say that Gutierrez has some of the best kicks I've seen in quite some time. I love his style. I'm a kicker as well, so I like and appreciate somebody that can kick really well. 8,300, I'll have some lineups with Gutierrez, and unlike you, I don't hate the fight. Looking at box scores, you see that they don't really average that much or that many points, and they don't really perform well. And I'm gonna, block my ears to that ACL talk you just said. And I think that Gutierrez can go in there and outclass him on the feet with his kickboxing. Morales said he's been working on checking leg kicks. Now, let me tell you that checking leg kicks takes quite some time. It's not something that you work on for one camp and then you're able to implement in fights immediately. It's more of a timing thing, and it's more based on your background as well. Where Morales, he's a wrestler, but also, has a boxing background. So when you're a boxer like that, you're really heavy on your front leg. So, he's super susceptible to getting lit up on his leg, and that's why he's been leg kicked by every single opponent. And, trying to get him out of that heavy front leg stance is going to be very difficult. It's almost like trying to rewire your brain a little bit. So at 8,300, I like Gutierrez. I think he's I'd say he's like a cash play because he doesn't really have too much upside for GPP. Morales could honestly have been working, catching a kick and firing a straight right hand down the middle, and that's his game plan, is timing the kicks with a punch. That's what I would talk to him about, is instead of work some checks and try to avoid those leg kicks. But when Gutierrez is sitting there trying to kick you, let's step inside and crack him with your good boxing. And maybe go back to the takedown well. You do have good wrestling that you just never use. But for me, I'll probably have very few lineups with Morales, probably about 10% lineups. And I'll have plenty of lineups with Gutierrez because I like his price at 8,300, and I think he can honestly beat Morales up.
Can't wait for that text message on Saturday when you go, why didn't I listen to your golden rule, Jason? Why didn't I listen? Go with my golden rule. You never take the first fight, but it's a fight that I just don't like from a DFS perspective. It's just merely because the way I see the fight going, I just don't see it being where someone's going to get a finish or a high score. If you do have a question on these fights, leave them right now in the YouTube chat. We're going to get to those here momentarily, but of course, want to let you know that sign up right now for the Awesemo Plus MMA weekly package for $8.95, where you'll get access to all of Awesemo's coveted tools. Go to awesemo.com/join and take advantage of this offer. And be sure to follow Awesemo on Twitter at Awesemo_com. Of course, we are also going to be here on Saturday, live before lock. We'll be at 5 p.m. each time, but do want to get into questions and comments. So be sure to fire those up right now on YouTube. Dustin going Woodley or Elliott, DraftKings GPP.
Man. I'll probably pair those guys in a lot of lineups because I like both of them. I would say it's tough to compare somebody that's in a 125-pound division against somebody who's in a 170-pound division. I do think that Elliott doesn't have a hard matchup as, Woodley does have a hard matchup in Gilbert Burns, but should have no problems. I like them both equally, to be honest.
Next question comes in from Ty. He says, who would you guys build a FanDuel cash core around?
Cash core around. All right. Let me give you 3. So I definitely think that Rodriguez at $13 should be one of the most popular, but one of the first people you look at. I think that FanDuel salary of $13 is a little crazy. It's ridiculous. I do like Elliott at $18 as well. And then I'll give you another. I'd probably say that Carlisle at 14 isn't bad. I like Carlisle there.
Next question comes in from Dan. He says, is having Carlisle, Rodriguez, and Abreu too much value in DraftKings cash?
Carlisle, Rodriguez, and Abreu. No, not at all. No, it's not. I like that, actually. And it's good to be contrarian like that. Like I said, leave some money on the table. Don't always spend your money, because the more money you spend on creating your lineup, the more likely you're going to split. So leave some money on the table. If you like the fighters, like for me, I'm going to have probably those 3 in some lineups as well. I like that.
Hunter asks, who do I like in the main event? Just in terms of the fight, I like Woodley. My concern with Woodley in DraftKings and FanDuel is if if he cannot finish the fight early on, is just the lack of volume that we've seen from him. Just go to UFCstats.com. That's where all the stats are, and you'll see when it comes to signature strike landed, he just doesn't land a lot. When it doesn't, he doesn't get that quick finish. So to me, that would be the concern with Woodley. But my official pick for the fight will be Woodley. Carr says, are you guys on Billy or Carlisle? I'm on Billy. I'm on Billy Q.
Yeah, I'm on the other side. I like Carlisle. I think that I've seen enough of Quarantillo, of him being in bad spots, that I think Carlisle can put him there. And I know that you need somebody in this fight. Now, I'm not going to avoid Quarantillo. I'm going to, like I said, have a 60-40 split, because, it's somebody's getting finished, or it's going to be so high scoring. It's going to be crazy. So you need somebody in that fight. I'm leaning a little bit towards Carlisle, though.
Mark says, in my experience, the first fight is great to play. Usually 2 relatively lower level fighters. Seems they often finish. Plus, your night's not over. Someone scores 130. Pete, we've done this show for long enough, and my rule pays off more times than not.
It does. And the times that it doesn't pay off is, when we're on the wrong side of it, obviously. So, but he's right with saying that the first fight is usually the most inexperienced fighters on the card. I mean, that's true. Or, sometimes the matchup that even the matchmakers are like, man, maybe 2 fighters that are like somewhat, out of the UFC or close to getting out of the UFC, or, just the lower level fighters typically. So I like Gutierrez at 8,300. In a few lineups.
Next one comes in from Carr. He goes, from Danny. Is green any good? Will you have any green as a pivot off the Rodriguez chalk?
Maybe one lineup with green. I've seen enough of green where he throws wild, so a shot could connect. We're talking MMA fights. A shot could connect. The value on 6,800 is crazy if you think that he does something well. He does have some submission ability, but the problem is I don't see him submitting Rodriguez. Rodriguez trains under Eddie Bravo, and his striking coach is Joe Schilling. So that's 2 of the best guys in each department. And I think Rodriguez is going to be schooled pretty well here, and have no problem with green.
Carr says, I think Roberts is the sneak play of the slate. What do you guys think about that? I don't know if I would say he's a sneak play just because at 9,200, I think it's kind of hard to say that's a sneaky play.
Let's look at the 9,000 options. Let's see. So we got Kenny at 91, Dern at 93, Roberts at 92. Dern is easily my favorite at 93. I think that Roberts might be more popular than you think, because if people are doing quick YouTube highlights of people and you watch Roberts' highlight film, he's choking everybody out and making it look easy. So, for GPP, he's probably the best. He's probably tied with Mackenzie Dern for potential. But if he doesn't get that quick finish, I don't know if he scores the best. But like I said, I think Roberts is the A side in there. I don't know if he's sneaky. He should get the W and not have too many problems with Weaver.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, to me, I think you have to play Roosevelt Roberts in that position if you're going to play either side of that. Carr saying 60 Spike, 40 Billy. They're also saying need a KO if you play Woodley. I would agree with that. I would certainly agree with that, just because of, as we've mentioned a couple of times, just the lack of volume we've seen in Tyron Woodley.
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as you get a finish within the first 2 rounds, you could be looking at good scores for anybody that's in an 8,000 or 9,000 price range if they did something well in the fight. So as long as they weren't just sitting there running around the whole time doing a Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis, you should be okay with a first or second round win. Now, when you say KO, I think you have to realize that TKOs and ground and pound is scored just the same, and that's how I see this fight ending. I don't see Woodley necessarily, knocking him out with some clean shot. I see him dropping Gilbert Burns or hurting him, and then following up with some hammer fist down on the mat, and that's how I predict Woodley's going to beat Burns, is through ground and pound.
Sam asks, what are the top fights to target while non-stacking them?
Okay, so when I had my little pen and I was circling fights, let me just say, I'll give you like 5 or 6 essential fights that I think you need to have. And, you could, pick which side you want. I think you need the main event for most of the time. You usually need that main event fighter because it's make or break. It kind of moves the needle of a lot of lineups. But in saying that, if a lot of people are on one person who's in the main event and they lose and you avoided it, you could be looking pretty nice. But I think the Woodley Burns is a fight you need. The Corntia Carlisle, that's the number 1 fight you need. The Dern fight, you might need that one because Dern's going to smoke her. The Rodriguez. And then the next 2, I would say, is the Elliott fight and the Jamal Hill fight. I honestly think those, what's that, 6? Those are fights I'm literally targeting, and that's where I'm getting most of my lineups from.
Next question comes in from Rick. He goes, Pete, do you wait to make your lineups until you see the weigh-ins?
What I like to do is I like to reserve contests, and I'll go in there, I'll reserve them. Or, when I'm thinking about it and I'm just kind of playing around with lineups, I like to hand build a lot of lineups, but I also like to use the Fantasy Cruncher over at Awesemo. Kind of makes it easy for me. Deselecting some fighters I absolutely hate. But weigh-ins definitely can make it, feel different. But let me tell you, after watching the weigh-ins, 2 weeks ago, who is the female fighter that looked terrible on the Courtney Casey? She looked terrible on the scale, absolutely terrible. And we kind of took a step back and were a little hesitant. But I was like, you know what? I'm still going to back her. I'm probably just not going to back her as heavy. And me judging the weigh-in kind of altered me having, a ton of ownership. And she went out there and smoked her with a nice armbar. So don't read too much into weigh-ins. It sucks when you cut weight. I would read a little bit, but don't go crazy on it.
Yeah. That 145 cut for you, no more.
Well, no, I'm smart. I'm not gonna miss weight. So 55 and up now. Let's go.
Next from Carr says, I'm thinking about fading Hill versus Abreu and Sakai versus Ivanov in GPP. Thoughts?
Yeah. I'm going to fade both of them in some of my lineups because the Sakai Ivanov fight, that fight sucks. The Hill Abreu fight, you got a striker against a grappler. Maybe Abreu just lays and prays and just holds him down and doesn't get the best, score because Hill's tough. Yeah, so I'm not saying avoid them completely, but in some lineups, definitely, stay away from those.
So we've got a trio of questions all related to the main event. David goes, I'm fading the main event. Carr responds, fading the main event is insane. And Nick says, dog or pass for the main event. I think fading the main event is not an awful idea just because of, to me, I will play Woodley is my pick for the fight, but I'm concerned doesn't get an early finish. And we see a 5-round decision where, maybe he only lands 60 significant strikes, 70 significant strikes. We've seen him land lower than that. So to me, I think fading the main event, look, 9 times out of 10, I think you have to have the main event. In this fight card, I don't think it's an awful idea.
I'm glad you said that about the 9 times out of 10, because that's the truth is you normally need the main event. You need 5-round fights. You really do, because if a 3rd round finish is the worst possible thing that could ever happen. If it ends in the first 2, you probably need it. If it ends in the 4th or 5th, same thing. You most likely need it. But that 3rd round is where you don't necessarily need it. In here, and also you're fighting against ownership. If say 60, 70% of people have Woodley out there, I'd rather eat the chalk, so to speak, and take Woodley here.
Jonathan goes, is there something to fighters that have been more active lately, especially with COVID restrictions? Seems the active guys have gotten in more training time. It says his question is in regards to Burns being more active lately. Woodley, not at all. I mean, look, it's obviously depends on the part of the country you're in, but I think more times than not, fighters are finding ways to get their training in. Obviously, for the most part, you can't have your normal training in, but at the end of the day, fighters get paid when they fight, so that's the motivation in the fighting.
Yeah, I think that if you're elite, why are you taking a fight if you can't have a legitimate training camp? So in my eyes, like Woodley coming back from a bad loss, I don't think he takes a fight unless he's having a legitimate, awesome training camp. You know what I'm saying? Like, he has so much to lose in this situation. During the quarantine, why the hell would you take a fight if you, if you can't really have good wrestling, jiu-jitsu? But I listened to some interviews, and he is training a lot of wrestling, jiu-jitsu, and everything, and his coaches are very impressed. So I'm backing Woodley heavy.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'll have lineups with Woodley in there, but yeah, I'm definitely going to have concern. Final question that we're going to get in here on this DFS strategy show from Ty: best MVP fighters on FanDuel, cash and GPP.
Best MVP, man. I hate the MVP spot, but you got to do it. Makes sense. I think Rodriguez, because, being so cheap with his $13 can make it easy to get all the studs that you want in your lineup, and he's going in a very soft matchup. I think Elliott is a higher up priced fighter at $18 that can get you a lot of stuff, a lot of takedowns, transitions, and all that. And then somebody in the Quarantillo Carlisle fight is something I think you need to look at for an MVP spot.
And of course, this all goes down on Saturday night. Main card starts, prelims start at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Main card 9 p.m. Eastern time. We will be here on the Awesemo YouTube channel on Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern time, live before lock, to answer your final question. So for Pete Rogers Jr., I am Jason Floyd. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the MMA DFS Strategy Show.